Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the AnthroPuzzled podcast. I'm your host, Abby Letzinger, and every 2 weeks we'll explore how anthropologists are forging unique career paths beyond the usual academic sphere. Tune in, get inspired, and start piecing together your own career puzzle within the world of anthropology. On today's episode, we have Minister Dr. Dena Michele Rosko. She graduated from Saybrook University with a PhD in organizational systems and currently serves as an author, publisher, minister, and educator. How are you doing today, Dena?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Abby.
Absolutely. So lots of titles in there. So what exactly is it that you do, and how does anthropology play an important role in it?
Yes, it's a great question. I love anthropology. I was thinking earlier today of what it means to me. I'm an ordained minister, and I love the word minister. Diakonos comes from the verb to serve, so I prefer that as my designation. And what that means is, as an ecuminister, it's an ecumenical approach to Christianity, which itself is a liminal act of making boundaries more fluid in between different denominations and sects and groups. Sex as an SECTS, and attempting to help people interact better and bridge those divides in a more meaningful way. And the academic portion has come through a circuitous route through studying creative writing and communication, Bible theology and journalism, organizational leadership and communication studies. And that was where I'd studied my master's at Gonzaga University. And I finished up with the organizational systems piece at Saybrook for my PhD. And what I loved about that is the systems perspective fits really well with my anthropological focus in my dissertation, which was studying organizational compassion and Victor Turner's concept for communitas, which is our movement from our own personal identity through any kind of marginalized experience towards a more communal experience where we meet other people who have transformed in a similar process. They may not share a similar identity, but they've gone through that process. And the organizational compassion, the dimensions of that, I studied how that mediated the suffering of that process of being marginalized and ostracized, and then coming out in something new as being transformed to complex wholeness. So that's where the organizational systems piece was hospitable to my anthropology leanings. And through my data, I actually used narrative again, like I did in my master's, only this time I used short stories, idealized systems, interviews with my participants who worked in a local partnership of different churches and government agencies who were providing services to help people going through a rough time. And I used storytelling and photographs to tell the story of what their ideal vision was, and then compare that to my dimensions. There were about 9 of them, of organizational compassion, of anthropological communitas, and then whether or not that reflected this ideal of transformation to complex wholeness. And so that's a big mouthful. And I think what art and writing and creativity allow is that fluidity, that those fluid boundaries necessary for liminality to take place and for that movement especially to take place. It's one of those things where we might in neuroscience say our parasympathetic nervous system is where we rest and digest, where we can create and imagine. And the moment you become aware of that, it almost ceases that flow in Victor Turner's terms. Yet we live in such a high edge, a high sympathetic nervous system environment and society where we're constantly pushed to produce, and with these roles and cultural products such as degrees that we invest an enormous amount of time and energy into that relate to our identities, where we create this identity. This is part of my mask almost. If we increase the distance between how well we are doing on the inside with what we're performing or producing on the outside, that can be a disparity and interrupt that complex wholeness movement that Turner talked about. So my experience actually searching for a program and then becoming a mother during my candidacy stage, and I transferred schools at that stage, redid candidacy, and this was for finding a more supportive environment for my research and going through just the change of a slower pace of life, a more rigorous, physically and emotionally demanding pace of life of being a mom, and dealing with some of the challenges that people might face that are very much reminiscent of what I was helping people through in the organization that I served with my dissertation. Gave me a lot of empathy towards what people may be going through now in today's environment. And it set the stage for my current work with publishing books around concepts of heritage through different genres, which is also a liminal act. So I would say I try to be anthropological about my work in my method and in my sensitivity towards how I'm interacting, because at the heart of it, it could be argued that anthropology sort of dips into each of the disciplines, each of the natural, social sciences, the arts and humanities, and even the health sciences, because it's about humanity and how we are making meaning and life come out of this experience of living in this world.
So as an author and publisher, do you have your own company, or do you kind of just do things independently?
I am in the early stages of developing my imprint. I've published my books under the imprint label for a publishing company to structure later on called Dogwood Group. So I haven't legally structured it yet. My dream and hope is once I'm done with this phase of the final touch of this 9th book of the Heritage Chronicles, and then is to transition the fantasy novel that I wrote, is to create a screenplay out of that and use that as a tool to invite other people to pitch their manuscripts to me to publish with my company about these different stories of heritage that we might have. And I feel that there's a lot of people that may be feeling very much displaced and afraid or stressed right now in the environment we're in the world, and the ruptures that have happened and the changes that have taken place. And so for my part in it, I hope to use storytelling and my background with ministry and prayer, and to just be a good neighbor and encourage people with books and stories, and hopefully can travel a little bit with when that time comes.
Yeah, no, and that's great. So, like, what led you to want to work within kind of like the field of anthropology? Because I know you consider yourself a story systems anthropologist, as well as a writer, publisher, and all those other titles. So, what kind of got you into that?
Oh, I love that question because it really does take me back. And my encouragement to any of our listeners is to go where that child in you wants to play. That child in you has joy. And I know that there's so much history and story to many of us that might not always be pretty. It's a mix of things. It's that movement toward and away wholeness. That's what trauma is when those ruptures and breaks happen. And we have to sort of reclaim and re-identify ourselves in our healing process. So for me, I really do feel that storytelling through writing and photography at a very young age, and most aware was when I was 12, sort of just all came together for me in my journals. And I would write short stories about girls who were of different ethnicities who were being marginalized for different reasons or for health or illness related reasons. And I would illustrate these stories and where I got this inspiration, maybe a little from my own life, maybe from what I was observing in my environment. I moved to a place called Bryn Mawr neighborhood in King County. Actually, it's unincorporated King County in Western Washington. So because we were unincorporated, it was a liminal place. So I grew up at a young age with having this liminal experience, not really feeling deeply rooted anywhere, but really feeling a scale of connection with a lot of people and places. And I would say that my faith experience, my upbringing in a church that my grandma helped start, helped give me a lot of sense of neighborliness and love and caregiving. And I was always over at my neighbor's house. I was riding my bike down to my grandma's, but just having those early experiences with place. And I would make a friend when I was 12, and she would move away, and we'd be pen pals for 20 years. And I learned from that the power of writing for relationship and connection. No matter where she or I was in the world, we'd find each other, and that letter would be in the mailbox. And that was the day where I like to encourage people today to start letter writing again. It really does invoke empathy and connection. Because once we got on social media, we just assumed we saw each other's pictures, and the letters and the phone calls stopped. And that's interesting, right? And then you start to feel disconnected. So I would say the other influence in my early years was my dad. He would occasionally leave us notes with a little sunshine, have a good day, be nice to your mom, stuff like that. So for me at a young age, writing became about connection. Around that same time, an aunt had given me one of those pink, I think they're the 110 cameras that you wind up. So I'm dating myself as a child of the 80s. And it had a 4 series flash that you would plug in on the top. And so I would take pictures of my gerbils, and I would, the next, again, blizzard that came through from Canada or Alaska, I'd go take pictures of that, because usually in Seattle it would just rain. At a young age, those were the experiences that brought me joy. And I didn't really conceptualize it as something necessarily that I would do vocationally until a class in writing would have us submit our short stories, and then he would put them on the wall if he liked them, and then everyone would read them. And my story would always get on the wall. And what I liked about that wasn't the attention or the acclaim. It was more that I noticed for the first time that people were reading my work and it meant something to them. And so those were early seeds in me that really wanted to keep that going.
So with all of the projects that you've worked on, is there any, because you mentioned your 9 books, did you want to talk about those at all?
Yes, I would love to talk about those. These are 9 books that, as I said, when I had my baby, I went through that whole marginalization experience that Turner talked about. In fact, so much so I wanted to change my dissertation topic. And by the way, this will likely happen to many of you if you are planning on going to this level. You get kind of tired of what you've been writing about for 3 years, and something else happens in your life and you think, oh, this is so important, I must study this. But you don't have the time or the money or energy, and your family's tired of it. They're tired of you, and they want it to be done. And I said to one of my community readers, I said, can I change my topic? And he very politely, without saying this, what are you, crazy? He said, no. So I wanted to, change around this whole idea of this movement towards complex wholeness, and as a study of heritage and the barriers that people face in transitioning to family, especially women. And I also learned how much childism there was in the world, which is not something I'd ever heard of before, but it's one of those isms. In fact, I was just reading tonight, UNICEF has a Building Child-Friendly Cities initiative that they've been working on for, I would say, over 10 years. And there's about 74, 76 countries, places, cities that have registered and been declared as a child-friendly city. And there's certain steps that they want you to go through. One of the key components is they want participation. They want children and youth to be involved in this process of deciding what their city looks like and how it's safe for them, how there's no poverty, and so forth. And so as I was writing these books, reading that tonight was very validating that I'm on the right track, because I wanted to really address those isms, the childism, the different barriers that we face when we're going through a life change, and all of this pressure to produce things that maybe is a distinctly felt pressure on women, as far as whether or not we have children, whether or not we marry, whether or not we do these extra relationally caregiving activities. And yet there's no real support for that in some respects. And so, for example, at my university, they did not offer maternity leave. I was pregnant during my dissertation process. And so, you have this value of we're a humanistic school, or we're a humanistic psychology, or we're into this ideal of compassion. But then in practice, it's not structured that way. And so there's this gap. And even if people are well-intended, it's just a gap that needs to be addressed. So I sought out to write these books, and I'll show you one of them. This is The Circle of Isla. It's a fantasy novel. There are 3 parts in it that I call scrolls. And it's this idea of wanting to help people feel and seen around what I've just described. And because when I was going through this challenge and these transitions of my family world, my responsibilities whilst being a candidate at a university for a PhD, I met a lot of people that came out of the woodwork and started telling me their stories of adversity, and they never told me them before. And I said, why didn't you tell me this? I would have been more prepared, And that's one of the benefits of storytelling. It helps that communitas process. It helps that movement to wholeness. Only we have to do the work around it in ourselves and then have the vulnerability and the courage and the safe spaces to share that with one another. And so in this book, you have the main characters, Kahira. She's a warrior. And of course, she wakes up in the land of the dead. And you learn about this whole realm that they're interacting with there. And you've got lots of, anti-heroes and heroines and annoying people and comedic relief. And the point of it is just to show what tangled nests we weave for heritage and what are some of the possibilities of making that better. And so that I wrote when in my son's first year, and I drafted that. You mentioned grit. Whilst he was sleeping in the morning, and he didn't nap for those first 8 months unless it was on me and I was walking, and he was up for 14 hours a day. And I can't fault him for this because he got that from me. So we would walk in his wrap on my chest. It rained, snow. There was even a typhoon. And I learned that I had no poncho pants, which I was sorely lacking. But we walked for 3 to 4 hours a day for that first year until he could walk himself. And then we would go on walks and hikes together. And so while he was sleeping, I would use my phone to draft each chapter. I would text and email it to myself, and I would voice dictate it, which made it a mess, of course, because it's still bad now, but it was worse then for voice recognition. This was goodness, 9 years ago. And then I have those files, and I would work on cleaning them all up. I'd work on assembling them into a Word document, and then it would be 2020 when I formatted all my books, and I overlapped all of them in the process of writing. And I actually finished the draft of Circle of Violet in 4 months. And that was a very early draft, but it was a mess because it was voice dictated. And so it needed to go through. And then, of course, I wanted to go back, and the first 5 books are actually a theological treatment of the same themes. And they're all meant for theology, heritage theology, formation and care. So the first 3, the first one is coming out of my dissertation. It talks about heritage themes for basic needs and using the biblical corpus and the gospel narrative for that, which hasn't been done before. It hasn't been treated in that sort of holistic manner, theologically speaking. You have womanist theology, you have liberation theology and systems theology and others. But it didn't have sort of this theme for heritage. The second book is actually one of my favorites because it addresses a marginalization experience, which is Kingdom Come, a gospel heritage for a legacy of safe love. And that goes over more of the systems and the structures that impede heritage. And again, drawing on the whole biblical corpus. And then Kingdom Come, a gospel heritage for the future is the third one. And that's the more positive vision. And I draw back themes from my dissertation, but I add more. So I talk about compassion, community, validation, spirituality, for example. And then the next 2, books 4 and 5, are more for engagement. So there's a devotional and a prayer book, and those can be used individually or as a group in congregations. And those I'm really excited to use. And then the next 3 are the family tree poem, which is basically the marginalization of peripartum, and as I wrote it in my experience, anecdotally, in poetry format. And one of my faults is that I don't go short. So my committees and my chairs will agree with that. I go long. And then this one here is actually a biography memoir I promised my grandma that I would do. And this was 9 years of my respite caregiving of her before I went into my graduate and postgraduate studies. And this includes over 100 photographs and just chapters about her life and the caregiving experience of her. And that sort of puts a face of humanity on what I'm describing was a transformative, but also marginalizing and exhausting experience, but there were rewards too. And my personal favorite is the smallest one. It's Graham's Ship Stories for My Son. And these were for the first 3 or 4 months postpartum were stories that I told him. And I worked with a perinatal bonding counselor at the time. And I was already telling him these stories, but I used that to help him and I through that transition and through that marginalization we were experiencing and just through learning that early bonding. And that includes some illustrations also. And I had the victory of reading it to him this summer when I was finally finished with it. And we had he's almost 10 now and I homeschool him. So, um, I was able to sort of be on the other side of that experience and see what transformed wholeness looked like for me. So I just want to encourage anyone out there, anything you're going through, you can apply your discipline to it or not, whatever resonates with you for healing and empowerment, because someone out there might benefit from your story or experience. And it's my hope that these works can encourage people to just build a more hospitable world.
And speaking of experience, with you have gone through grad school, getting a master's and getting a PhD, do you have any advice for students who might also be looking to go into higher education?
Yes, I have a lot, but mainly I do want to encourage you and to do networking approach to it. Typically, we do I hope they accept me. I hope they hire me. What resumes and applications are built on is keywords and implicit bias. And even when you step into an interviewing or hiring committee, many people will report that they don't know the criteria by which they're judging you. They don't know what they're evaluating you on based on anything else but their gut feeling. And people might have different guts. They likely have different feelings about it. And it's sort of vague and amorphous and not very guiding. But what we want to do is be empowered going through that and also connected. And so I learned an approach from my neighbor when he was laid off over 20 years ago. He had his own company that he had successfully built over delivering a very popular newspaper. And once it went online, then overnight, his business crashed, which is only part of the story. But it put him in an employment crisis. And so he went to this workshop, and it was by Peter Caban. And I don't remember the title of the book completely, but the advice that was given was to network with people, to seek out building out your calendar. So what you do is say you are looking for a certain degree. And so you've combed the internet already a few times and found some places. And so you look through people who work there on faculty, on staff, if they list any of the student leaders, and you find anyone that sort of resonates with you in their bio or in their description or their research interests, and you reach out to them. You can email them, you can call, you can find them on social media or LinkedIn and ask for 20 to 30 minutes on their schedule because you have a few questions about their passion and their journey. You make it about them, not you. And then at the end of that, they're so curious or encouraged, they want to know why you're talking to them. And you say, and you let them know up front too that you're considering their program for full disclosure, but you just let them know your own interests and your own passions and where you want to go. And is there a place for you in that field, and what advice would they give you? And then you just ask them, if I have any more questions, can I reach out to you for another call or another, online? And they'll usually say yes. And I developed a really lovely network that way with people who are willing to make time for me all over the country and in other countries as well. I even spoke to a couple of university presidents who, one of them was a fellow alum from Gonzaga University and was able to sort of get a lay of the landscape. I spoke to staff and faculty who were part of the maintenance or admissions process there, and also students. And I will say the importance of this saved me so much time and money, and them too. I was actually able to spare myself from being shut out of a program that ended before people were finished and basically kicked them out as, what do they call it? No. When you don't have your dissertation done, you're not finished, but you've done all the coursework. And this was a school that had a doctoral program in a field that I was interested in. And they offered me admission, and something fell off to it. I was even having dreams. It sort of listened to your instinct too, which would be my second suggestion. And I just didn't think that I would feel like it would require a lot of monthly travel, a lot of time away from family, and which would almost double my cost of investment because of the expense of the length of travel they required. And when I talked to some of the students, they were incredibly disgruntled with the program. And so that was a red flag. So I wasn't sure. So I asked for a deferral because it took a lot of effort and investment just to get to that acceptance. And so they were gracious enough to grant me that deferral. In the meantime, I found a different program. And then a few years later, the very year that I would have candidacy at Saybrook, I got a letter in the mail saying they were closing the program. And if students didn't finish in 1 or 2 semesters, they were out. And I was like, oh, that process saved me. So it's not just about getting in and getting that degree. It's also being safe and having a process that's vocationally identifiable to you and what feels joyful, even. I would say I was very passionate about the methodologies of writing, broadly conceived with the rhetorics and performance of pictures and poems and different things. And I wanted to use those as research, not data, but narrative. And I needed to be in an organization or institution that had faculty and a culture that was open to that. Because believe it or not, some places might be intrigued, but not supportive. And that's why I transferred. I would learn at my other program that they didn't have a faculty to support, even though they had said that they did. And they didn't even know what my methodology was. And they didn't let students pick their chairs or their methodologists. They picked them for you. It was very patriarchal, very paternalistic. It caused so much anxiety and discomfort. And I remember sitting there at the conference in August when I was starting my research phase and just faced with this stark, blunt reality that I was not going to finish there. There was no way in heck, because it was all of a sudden some weird kind of false pseudo-quantitatively measured place. And I was this far out qualitative researcher. So even though I had done my networking with there, and it was not structured or staffed accordingly to meet my goals. So it's not fire safe, completely fireproof, but it can reduce the harm and increase your odds of success. And in fact, one of the programs that offered admissions, they said, well, we'll just skip the interview phase because you've already talked to all of us. So it can really give you those entrepreneurial skills, which you're going to need those skills later if you do an interviewing-based ethnographic study or something like that. So I really encourage a networking approach where and then you start taking the power back and learn early on how to write a proposal. That would be my third suggestion. And so career networking, vocational networking, and also listening to your instinct, and then learn how to write a proposal early on, even if it's a template or something. I know there's AI out there, but there's also satisfaction with knowing how to do it and how to teach others.
Now, if someone wanted to get into the career path that you currently hold, even though you have multiple career paths, what could someone look to make salary-wise in any of these occupations?
Well, right now it's a little tricky because a lot of the opportunities for my work with writing want me to train AI, and it's a short-term sort of thing. Writers have typically been shorted economically because our economics is bent toward a certain bias, and writing is a slower process. It's a creative process. It's hard to put a price tag on. And have you ever noticed that writers and artists get famous or their work's worth a lot after they die? So that's not encouraging, economically speaking. So you really, like a lot of fields, have to do this because you love it. I'll just say that to start. Secondly, there's a lot of advice out there about how to do your sales. You have to, everyone wants to, since the pandemic, to do a subscription or Patreon or whatnot model, where you're charging people every month, and then you have to produce more. You have to produce content regularly on YouTube and on your social media and give white papers or whatever, PDF downloads, and have your secret private Facebook or whatnot group that you're responding to. And it's just an enormous amount of work that doesn't sound very pleasant. Then you have people who are giving advice, say that, oh, Penpreneur is one such book. You just need 1,000 some people that really like your stuff. You just need a niche market. And once you have that, then you can charge them monthly fees and upsell them and own your website and find a cheap printer. And that's how you will create wealth. And then you have people who say, forget all that, just learn an investment scheme and then do what you want once you get rich. So not very helpful. On the teaching level, when I was in school, a friend of mine, she was very cautious and sends me this book, How to Get What You Came for your PhD. And she was very concerned. I mean, let's be honest about the numbers at the time, and it's probably not changed. It was less than 50% completion rate. And that's not just because of this primal scene and bias that, only the tough, boot camp people survive and make it through. It's actually built in a way that's not sustainable and possibly not attainable. There's access issues with higher education that need to be fixed. In fact, when I went to two of the schools, one had changed its status from nonprofit, where they had mostly nurses and pastors and missionaries and teachers go there, to for profit, where they paid taxes to their cities and they considered that their social justice work. It was pretty disheartening. And they were actually saying this at the orientation. And I was a little shocked. Like, oh my goodness, this is really contrast to the mission of this place. And that's the one that I would transfer from later on. So there were definitely warning signs. And so I'm not painting a very encouraging pictures. Around that time, when I transferred to another school, where I ended up finishing at a Sabra, they were going through a transition themselves because higher education, a lot of these private schools had not been surviving financially. And one of my alma maters just sold to Jessup University, its Portland campus, last year. And so others are joining, conglomerates like TCES. It's like an overarching think of it like a landlord company, but for academic institutions. It's an overarching management company, and they actually control and influence how all of those institutions market themselves and what they can and cannot do. So it's a little bit challenging environment. I will say it's important to understand that you're stepping into that. And I would just say, for the economic finance piece, in your earlier studies or certifications, be sure you're doing something that can be payable, because this isn't. But there are ways to go about it. And I think for me, I'm still looking for those copy editing, copywriting work, the work around coaching and consulting, being private practice with that, and also any professorial type jobs. And those are very specific. Only at the time, 1 in 3 graduates that would end up being a professor. And a lot of places have downgraded tenure to be adjunct or assistant status, and because of financial reasons. And this happened in my alma mater, because when I onboarded in, they were going through a potential bankruptcy filing, which I wasn't told when I applied. And so there's just these behind the scene things that you don't know. And I got through it. This is like grit and also favor and answered prayers and hard work. But I think the short answer to your question is, while you're looking for a degree program, be sure to take that into account. What role do you want economics to play in your reward for that effort? And is this just for the common good, almost a pro bono effort, and you're passionate and you have the means and you can do it and you don't only care about being paid for it later? Or is there something in between where you can be doing some kind of day job, or you could do some shorter training to, skill up so you can earn a wage doing something satisfying while you're in school? I don't really have a very good answer for your question, because it's just a tough environment right now for a lot of people. So, I think for me, I just go where my passion is. And when I'm looking for work, it's along the themes of, building child-friendly cities, or addressing heritage, or, teaching people writing, those kind of roles.
So it's more along the lines of, you kind of have to weigh the pros and cons of, even if something doesn't make a lot of money financially or whatnot, there might be other benefits that you get from the experience, whether it's through volunteering or just being in a field that just naturally just doesn't make a lot of money. You can probably get something out of it. So it's kind of finding the balance of
It's
that.
finding the balance and what you can do, what your family can do if you have one, or what, your responsibilities are financially. I will say there's a huge intrinsic reward to higher education, just learning these skills. And also, I would encourage people to apply their research as they go. Don't just wait till you get to the proposal stage and then blank out and panic and say, I don't know how to do this. Build your bibliography in your coursework as you go, which is what one asset of one of the institutions I went to, they required this. And I was able to build out my bibliography for my literature review. And I would apply it to the course topics for the final paper. And so that was okay to do. You have to talk to your professor and be sure you don't get dinged for that, but that's really worthwhile. And so, I was able to help the organization and partnerships in my city as I went through this process. So it's about making progress, not about being perfect. So we're confronting the marketing and even, I would say, the supremacist sort of overtones of a sale, where you're not doing this to define yourself, or you're doing it because you're passionate about it and it means something to you. And there might be a wealth factor in it, whether that's money or connection or influence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly right. Now, before we get to our final 4 questions, was there anything we haven't discussed today that you'd still like the listeners to know about?
Oh, thank you for asking. To that point of what I just described, I did my ministry training in a very unusual institute that set up their financial structure as a donation based. And so they don't require tuitions from people, at least when I went. They use like graduation fees, and they're very low and very minimal. And I found that in that experience of being marginalized from being able to access that work, as a mother and being tired and my energy and all that, I found that to be so accessible. So even if you're waiting for that program or that golden ticket or that opportunity, you can still find ways to skill up. There's, Coursera and other platforms too that are low cost and easy access. So don't be ashamed of that. Just be curious and do what brings you joy, and be willing to share that with other people at some level with how you want to express yourself in your research. And you will find that you will just be exercising that resilience as you go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So my first question of the 4 to you is, what is the best piece of advice you would offer to someone who's interested in your field?
Okay, I would just say quiet and contemplation is not something that we do well. My personality, I love it, but I walked so much. Any kind of physical movement that you can do, that you're able to do, whatever your body can do. Some people do Pilates, some people just lift weights, some people dance. For me, it was walking and having this unstructure and just being able to go was so good for my mind and making decisions and thinking, or just not giving myself permission to not think. And I would say with that, prioritizing your health. So this is definitely not a field specific answer to your question, because what I found is that we create and produce and perform from not just who we are, but more along the lines of how well we are doing. And sometimes that can contrast or conflict with or be at tension with our own values and beliefs of what we expect how well we should be doing, because we're undergoing this good thing. We're doing this good deed of going to school and we're helping people in our field. So I would just say prioritize your health, your safety, your connections, and try to not compromise those in the effort to go to school. Have safe housing, have safe people in your life that you can talk to, a minister or a counselor or a friend, something like that, or just keep your health first. And then in terms of the practicality of finding in your field, like what field you want to be in. Again, that vocational networking approach, and then just reflecting on your own vision and mission about yourself. Like, what is my vocational vision in this? Vocation comes from the classic voce. It's the same viva voce that we use to defend our dissertation for our oral exams. And so this concept of being called out to do something, it's a spiritual implication that this is a whole system. And the word holy is where we derive our word health. So this, again, that anthropology of whole systems, that movement toward whole system. So, thinking in yourself, doing that reflection around what exactly is a contribution you want to make, and how do you want to go about doing that, and how do you think this field will situate, and then start talking to people in that field. So it doesn't have to be an academic program. You can do that networking approach with people who are writers or who are consultants or educators or whatever the case may be. So prioritizing your health, doing some reflection, moving your body, because it's very sedentary to do research and writing, and talking with people and just reflecting on your own contribution and your location, I think is sort of a life work, and it can really help guide you.
Yeah, and I can agree with the moving your body and, helping you kind of think a little bit more, because I've definitely noticed I have a desk job, and when I go from my desk job and then I come home and I just watch TV for the rest of the night, I feel way more drained than I normally do, except like if can't do it now because the sun sets at 5 p.m. But like during the summer, I would get off work and I would text my friend and be like, hey, you want to go for a hike? We got 2 hours till sundown. And she'd be like, yeah, let's go on like a 45, 30-minute hike. And it was always super refreshing. And I'm just like, okay, now I can feel as if I've accomplished something, because I don't consider like going to work and doing work as like an accomplishment of my day. That's just something I have to do to pay bills. But being able to get out into nature and go for walks, I think is super beneficial. Like a lot of people are like, oh, you can go on your hot girl walks, or you can like go take your dogs for a walk. And I'm like, taking my dogs for a walk is not a mental health thing. That's a ruined mental health thing. So if I go for a walk without the dogs, I'm just like, oh, this is actually super enjoyable. But if I go for a walk with dogs, I'm like, gotta live with other dogs. It's too much. But I totally agree in that regards. Now, the second question is, are there any changes that you wish to see within the industry that you kind of work and volunteer within?
Oh, for sure. I just think there's a lot, and it's almost a question of where do you start. But I would say, if we're going to prioritize whole systems, wholeness, let's prioritize that over production. So then you start breaking down our structures and our practices and what we're expecting of people in their roles. Children here have 6 to 8 hours a day at work. In some places, they go home with homework. Some school districts have done away with homework because they realize that children, one, they're already there working all day. And how many of us want to go home from work and do more work? I know some of us do, but do we really enjoy that? It's not relaxing. And they're not getting their rest because they're staying up late to do their homework. And if they're in high school, they're getting up very early to do sports, and they're just not sleeping. And then considering the types of foods we're eating, and because we're so busy with those responsibilities, for instance, we're eating certain potato chips or things that are fast, that aren't really healthy or nutritious. So we're getting calorie loaded and cortisol loaded, but we're not getting nutrition necessarily, or the fitness or the movement that we just talked about. So I would definitely say to prioritize health in any of the industry I'm in. Ministry in particular is susceptible to burnout and compassion fatigue and things like that. Same with educators, social workers, any of those fields, you're susceptible to burnout and fatigue, which is taxing on mental health. It reduces productivity. Stress-borne illnesses can become chronic, especially manifesting in women. And I would say with that, validate what people are saying to you that they need to be more healthy to produce and perform at said job. If people are saying, hey, I need a break, or I need less hours a day, or I need to go pick up my sick kid, or I need to go do elder care too. That's a big deal. Women are often put in a sandwich generation where they're caregiving for children or elders if they have that situation in their life, not always. Um, but there's so much cortisol, there's so much stress and adrenaline that we're expected to run off of. And then we develop this higher pain threshold, which is not helpful because it is an immediate moment to survive us through that, but not for the long term because you need to feel to know how to take care of yourself and not crash. So again, I would say prioritizing health. And then I would say really prioritizing how to build resilience and empowerment in the roles that people have and paying them accordingly, and stop with this bias that I could go on and on about towards a certain type of person or a certain type of job that we think is spectacular and hard and so should get a lot of money. And then these people who are actually working just as much, if not more hours, doing things that we don't think are important. Just think about it for a minute. Many of the caregiving professions and the social sciences and the arts and humanities, you can think of it as caregiving for society, if you will, very loosely. They're not paid what is a livable wage. And that means that we're saying, economically speaking, they don't matter and their work doesn't matter. But if we can get rich off of it, then that's fine. And so there's really just this unfriendly disconnections. I would say also trying to just be more neighborly and kind. Right now, we know we're in this politicized environment. There's a lot of rupture. There's reasons that we may or may not be aware of why people are fueling that. We can help bring people back to center by just being kind. And I know I'm not always good at that. If someone cuts me off, or I had a guy honk at me the other day at a stoplight. I wasn't going anywhere. It's like, and he was just mad. I was like, okay, okay. I'm at a stoplight. I can't go anywhere. What are you doing? It's just people are on edge. And so I think trying to make more healthy and friendly organizations, even neighborly, if we can't get to friendly, and finding out what that means. And I think that will go a long way if we prioritize that over just the production and just the making money, because we'll see that that's a concept for flourishing. It's a path to flourishing where we will gain wealth from that, but it won't just be money. We won't have to just have money to have better health and a fancier house or a maid to take care of it. We'll have better health for other reasons because there's less stress. So I would really say that in all the organizations I've been in all of the roles I've done, I would say that's a priority.
Yeah. And I think that's something that companies struggle with a lot is, how do I word this? A lot of companies, it's gotten a little bit better with work-life balance, but a lot of companies are like, if we don't feel like you prioritize your job here, do you really, do you want to be here? So like when people are like, Mike, like example, if my kid's sick, I need to go pick them up. I'm sorry, I need to leave a little early. Can I go do that? And they're like, you obviously don't care about your job enough if you're going to go do that. Or if you're sick, like a lot of, especially here in the United States, if you're sick, you feel guilty for calling out of work, but then you also feel guilty for going into work because you're going to get people sick. It's definitely a culture issue that hopefully and work on.
I agree with you because I can see that also. This challenge was put to me, over 14 years ago in one of my classes when we were talking about this very topic of, well, do you go to work sick or stay home? And here we are post-pandemic. And I was at a swearing-in ceremony the other night at City Hall. It was lovely and amazing. There's one gentleman there, and there's probably, I don't know how many people, like 60 in this little room. And he's coughing and sneezing, unmasked. And we're all kind of like this. And I had a good mask on, but it's still like, why are you here? Why are you doing this? Could you at least wear a mask? Like, we're still doing this. But on the flip side of the question is, well, people will say, well, I can't afford not to go to work. So again, we're back at that economic priority that's being mirrored back from us, where the business or what have you is saying the economic priority is our reason for existence. It's why we're a business. And so it's understandable that they have that priority. But that cultural pressure for that transformation to have it prioritize health and see that flourishing as a priority and wealth gain as part of that and wealth distribution and sharing, not just your stakeholders or your capital or seed investors, should not be just getting that money. For example, this could lead to like this idealized exploit and discard, this sort of narcissistic almost pathway of people starting out these businesses. This happens a lot in the tech industry. And then 5 years later, selling it so that the stakeholders or the capital investors or both get their investment money back and their return on investment back. It's looked at a way for them to gain wealth. So this is why, as a writer, I'm not gaining wealth in this environment because I don't want to do that. It's an ethical conflict. And then you have all those families out of work who have to go find another tech company who might or might not do the same thing. Very large, very famous tech company in my city of Seattle, before the holidays, laid off a lot of people. And so what are you going to do? I mean, that's sort of heartless. And how much billions of dollars, how many zeros, how many digits do you need on your profit margins? How many really do you need to be okay? So yeah, I hear your point. I do get riled up about that.
Yeah. Well, on the flip side, what do you just absolutely love about what you do?
Yeah, for sure. I love encouraging people, and I cannot take full credit to that because I didn't know how to do that as a younger person as much. I think it's more as a spiritual influence and a gifting that I have. And so I feel that when people say, oh, you inspire me, or I felt so encouraged after talking to you, or you're such a gift. And I'm like, I don't see it because I was just being myself, is very meaningful to me. And so I know, and I hope that my books can carry that same feeling for people where they not just feel inspired as though it's from a distance outside of you, but just feel encouraged in your life where you are on some level. I think that's what keeps me going, and just wanting to share, the love that and help that God has given me through all my hard times, to the point where I'm actually on the other side of it and I got through, is just dumbfounding to me, considering the things that I went through. It doesn't make me special. We all have our stories. It just is looking with an eye of gratitude, I think, is also something I enjoy. It helps offset the discouragement of what we just talked about, that, I've actually feel very satisfied knowing that I have made even a small difference where I am. And if you just take a little bit of influence and express gratitude to yourself that you are helping others, you are influencing in some way, then that can help carry you through.
And for the final question, where can listeners learn more about you and what you do?
Yes, you can go to my website. Namely, it will have most of my social media. It will have blog posts with my dissertation and thesis and links to my books. And that is at my first and middle name, so DenaMichele.moi. And you can go there and just learn more, and you can reach out to me at my email also, drdinamichele@gmail.com. And if you have any questions or you want to follow up on any of the suggestions I gave, or need some encouragement, or if you're in school in a program and you need a reader for your dissertation and they allow it, some schools will allow one outside of the institution reader, I can do that. So I would love to hear from you.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on. This is definitely a unique interview and experience because it's within the realm of anthropology, but it's almost like an outside perspective of anthropology, which makes it even great.
Thank you for having me. This has been a wonderful opportunity. I hope people felt encouraged.
Thank you so much. And again, have a great rest of your night. And it was nice talking to you.
You too, Abby. You take care.
Thanks. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to another episode of AnthroPuzzled. This show was produced by me and distributed in collaboration with the American Anthropological Association. A special thanks to Cheyenne Brewer for editing the website, L. Akers for the incredible logo design, and to AnthroPuzzled's interns for the episode descriptions. The music is courtesy of Chad Crouch, aka Poddington Bear of Sound and Picture. If you have any questions, you can reach me at abby.letzinger@anthropuzzled.com or as AnthroPuzzled on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Until next time.